Okay, chatter. You should have gotten a notification on your Twitch. You just need to lock in. So could you kind of steelman your issue?
The issue for me was simple, and it's just that on the one hand, there is this position that seems to be taken by those, I'm generally on the left, that the issues surrounding trans rights and just all of the issues that fall within that bucket are, either very rare or, not actually an issue, or, just sort of a smokescreen. And so that's one position, but then simultaneously I'll hear from the same person or from other sources, to be fair, that this is something that is important to, make sure it is defended and defended vigorously. And so that just seems to me to be a contradictory opinion. I don't think that this is a major issue that, is prevalent and affecting many people's lives. I just don't.
Like,
but
negatively,
I don't think it's a non-issue. Generally, I mean, I obviously it would affect those who, identify as trans, but the general population doesn't see this on a day-to-day basis. And so, for those on the right who really make an issue out of this and blow it up into something that is much bigger, I think that's disingenuous as well.
Okay, so let me review so I know how to kind of talk to you about this. So you see it as kind of a contradiction that people with the opinions that I share will tell people who are, saying, oh, we need to stop women sports being infiltrated by trans people, telling them that, hey, this is not an issue, don't worry about this, you're silly. And then we'll say, trans rights is a issue of our time that needs to be defended vigorously.
Right. I think that's right.
The way I kind of break it down is when you legislate against the existence of trans people, them being able to compete in sports, or them having access to gender affirming care, them being present in popular media, whatever it is, it does not affect their day-to-day lives, but it does, however, have a downstream effect on cis women, on women who are not trans. You'll probably recall the Algerian boxer, right?
Yes.
Khalif. She is cis, as well as the, I believe, Taiwanese boxer was also accused of being trans. Neither of them are. Neither of them are trans, and neither of them are intersex. So this is an instance where when you go along with the anti-trans panic, it will have a downstream effect on your life, whether you like it or not. The moment you start talking about eroding civil liberties or eroding access to things that are essential to someone's existence, whether it's abortion, whether it's, access to medical care, it will go for other people who are not the immediate target of it. The reason I say it's important is because to protect trans people, every policy against, let's take K through 12 education, anti-trans policies, is because those are kids, first of all. And I think it's important to foster an environment of inclusion, not just because it's kind, but because any policy that would be introduced is effectively a pro-bullying policy. You're bullying these kids who are trying to figure out what's going on with them.
What I'm taking from this, though, is that maybe you weren't one of the people that sort of holds these contradictory viewpoints. This is a significant issue in your mind, and it is not something that you could say is not an issue or that we're focusing on too much. That was sort of the crux of my issue, was just the hand waving in some respects, where you say, no, this isn't an issue, or it's a tiny issue, why are you focusing on this? But then I hear a vociferous defense of it, as you just eloquently laid out.
Because it doesn't negatively affect you. People existing as trans people doesn't negatively affect you. It doesn't.
I would argue, the goal of legislative policy doesn't need to be to diminish negative effects on those who pass that legislative policy. I'd argue that sometimes, and there are some legislative examples I can say on the sort of left side of the aisle that do the same. You're sort of trying to help those who can negatively affect themselves, who are other than yourself. So in this case, trans people, especially trans youth, as people who are suffering with psychological disorders and desperately need help. And that help doesn't come in the form of affirmation. It comes in the form of treatment.
What is the
therapy,
treatment?
Therapeutic treatment.
Right. So what does that look like, though?
I'm not a psychologist, but I understand it was in the DSM
that's fine.
for quite a while.
Neither of us are psychologists, but as someone who's invested in making sure that people get this treatment, because you're partially right. The solution is treatment. The very first stage of that treatment, though, is affirmation. It is being kind to them enough to say, okay, let's figure out what's going on. That doesn't mean that we're going to immediately start throwing you on estradiol. Doesn't mean that we're going to get you into like surgery, because these things take years. It's very, very cumbersome to go through this process. I have a trans daughter. They're not going through hormone treatment right now, mostly because of poverty, but because I care about them, because, we don't have access to it. It's just going by the name they want. If they want to wear certain clothes, I let them do it because it makes them happy. And if it turns out that they were trying to figure out who they are, figuring things out, and later on they're like, yeah, maybe like, bisexual, pan, whatever it is, but I don't know if I want to, go by non-binary pronouns or whatever it is. If that's fine, because I gave them the kindness to simply let them be and figure it out and be supportive. Any kind of legislation that's trying to restrict this, whether it's, forcing teachers to out students to their parents who are not ready to be out to their parents, that's bullying. You're setting them up for abuse.
Well, I don't know if I want to shift to that issue, but very interesting that it's close to home for you. And, I empathize with that. Obviously a core part of the objection is not only what I stated that, from, fundamental standpoint, people on the right see this as more of a psychological disorder to be treated than an identity. We're particularly concerned about children, being affected by this negatively. And I think it's one thing to, affirm and to use the names that they want to use. I actually, I don't think too many people are going to get incensed about that. But, when you talked about, what is it called, estradiol? So when you mention that, that's where people get concerned about the effects and, of someone who doesn't have capacity yet making that decision.
Could I ask how old you are?
Again, I'm worried about dogs.
That's okay.
I'm between 35 and 45.
Okay. All right. So you're like just a, 10-year like generation ahead of me, right? Because I'm 32.
Yeah, and I've got 2 daughters as well.
Okay, that's great. How old, do you mind me asking, or would you prefer to keep that?
They're under 5.
Okay. Wow. I won't ask you what you would do if your daughters came to you and said that they, want to be called by a boy's name. I'm not going to ask you that, right? Because we don't know how you would react in the immediate. I mean, you and I would probably hope that we would be good parents to our kids and, love them for who they are, regardless of how they turn out, right? We'll just leave it at that because we want to assume that we're all, good people. But the reason I ask how old you are is I take finasteride for my hairline, level out a hormone imbalance in order for me to not go bald, right? Just kind of stops my hair loss. Now, that is definitionally gender affirming care. One of the things that we value as men is, looking young. We want to look handsome for the ladies or the men in my case. And we want to have a projection of what we interpret ourselves as to look that way on the outside. That's no different. Now the root of it is a hormone imbalance because, high testosterone levels causes hair loss. But what I want out of it is the same. I want it to affirm my gender, which is a man with beautiful ginger hair. Now, I don't know if you also take anything for hair loss or for maybe, because finasteride and minoxidil are used to like treat prostate cancer as well.
No, I'm very aware. It's interesting that you would bring up finasteride. I actually took it. I was balding very early on as a 17-year-old guy.
One in 5 men.
And so I took it. And this unfortunately sort of cuts against your point. I had some very negative reactions to it.
Oh, sure.
Which are rare. But I have, since then sort of developed a bit of resentment towards the doctor who said, hey, this is totally fine. Take it. There are no negative side effects. You're only a 17-year-old kid, which is sometimes the age of majority, but usually it's 18. And so, just trust me and you can take this. And it had very significant consequences for me over a number of years where I had, to go through all kinds of other treatments to reverse the effects.
Yeah, that's terrible. That's terrible. But that is not a indictment against, either gender affirming care or, medical doctors prescribing things. That's an indictment against poor medical practices, against, a rejection of your Hippocratic oath, right? That is malpractice. But that doesn't cut against the overwhelming research on, either estradiol as a use for gender affirming care or for finasteride as a, what I define as gender affirming care, but for hair loss. Neither of those things are an indictment against the usage of it. It is an indictment against doctors not following proper practices. They're supposed to inform you. When I went, I said, I know there are some side effects, but with my age, with my current, T levels, what are some higher risks that I could take? And they told me. And a doctor will tell you those things if they are practicing good care. Bad practices is going to happen. The way we get around that is through regulation, to ensure that people are getting proper training and to have an informed public. The problem with the discussion around gender affirming care for trans people is no one is more informed on what kind of treatment has what side effects or what kind of treatment they could go for than trans people. There is so much research that shows that this has overwhelmingly positive effects, even if we're just talking about social transitioning, changing clothes, haircut, name, pronouns. Just social transitioning has overwhelmingly positive effects. We're not even talking about hormones or surgery.
Yeah. So, but sort of going back to my point about what is an issue of particular concern with those who are minors, I think my position is consistent now in that I would not be for any sort of treatment like finasteride for those who are still minors.
Sure, and it's great that you have that position, because kids who are experiencing gender dysphoria are not going to be getting hormone treatment except in very rare cases like precocious puberty, a physical development that is out of place. But as far as people who are under 18, the cases of trans or people experiencing dysphoria is very rare that they would be going on hormones. We're talking about maybe 1,000 people over the last decade.
Yeah, but those are, from my point of view, those are real people who matter. And
they are.
So
they are. That's why we should make sure they get the treatment they need.
Even if the number is small, if there are a number of those people who are treated who then later regret that, what are they then living with?
Yeah, well, it's actually a good question to ask, because when we're talking about crafting policy, the outliers like that is something to consider. And that outlier is 0.003%. And those in that 0.003%, the vast majority of them did not detransition because they found out they were not trans. They detransitioned because they were in danger, because they were getting violent attacks on them for transitioning. That's why. That's why when I say this is not an issue that negatively affects you, stop worrying about this if you're not trans. But it is something that's very important for us to make sure we're not restricting and that we protect trans people. That's why.
What I'm taking from what you're saying then is that, with respect to those who regret it, the number is effectively zero. Is that your position?
Important word here.
Sorry. You're right. So zero in terms of, those who, excluding those who regret it because they're facing some sort of discrimination.
It's a very small amount of people. And here's the thing. It could be that there are some people who were victims of abuse, who were trying to figure out who they were and found comfort in a very welcoming community and tried to emulate the existence of the people who gave them shelter at a time that was difficult for them and found out, oh, maybe this is not for me. It doesn't matter though, because the amount of people who were preyed upon by doctors to, start going on hormone therapy, you would be hard pressed to find one that will be able to provide you evidence of that.
Yeah, my only reservation is this idea that perhaps that number isn't zero, and obviously that the risks that I'm worried about are mitigated significantly if it is close to zero.
Well, it is zero. There's just a decimal behind it. Now, again, this is a question of community safety and outreach for people who, like I said, maybe they got kicked out of their home when they were a kid, right? For whatever reason. And the people who in their lives were there for them were the queer community, right? And they were young and they tried to emulate the people around them. Maybe they figured out that, I can find safety in this community and I want to figure out if this is for me too. But then later on figured out it wasn't, right? But if we're talking about legislating against that, the way we legislate around that is by protecting kids from abuse, which primarily exists inside the home, not at the schools where teachers are, asking what your pronouns are, or at the school where they played on a soccer team with a trans boy. Like that's not what's going to be, where their cycles of abuse are. It's going to be in their home, in their churches, in their, Boy Scouts club, right? So that's where we need to focus on the actual issues. Yeah. I hope that, some of the things that we talked about that, you can kind of revisit periodically, maybe, food for thought. Again, I didn't want to invoke the, what would you do if your daughter, came to you, but it is worth introspecting on, of what kind of fathers we want to be. Because mine's 14, right? I am basically adopted this kid because my wife's aunt is not a good parent. So this was kind of thrust upon us. I didn't intend it. I got the snip. I don't want to have no kids. And this was kind of thrust upon us, not out of choice. And it came out of nowhere. And it has been a difficult examination of my own principles of being scared for them, but also knowing what the literature, what the scientific backing, what the research is on, how to help trans kids. It has been a difficult examination of that because on one hand, it's confusing because I'm not going through it and I'm having to, try and help guide them through something that I'm not familiar with in a place that doesn't have a lot of, outreach for trans youth and is not very kind to them. I would imagine that you would also want to be, a good dad to them.
I mean, yes. So when you put it that way, of course, yes. And I'll say that you're a good man for taking her on then and taking her out of that situation. Yeah. And so I respect that enormously.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the conversation. If in the future, there's still some confusions about it, exactly how we talk about it, why we talk about it the way we do, or if you just have a question about something that's, you're hitting that wall again, right? Certainly reach out. Sure. Appreciate it. Yeah, not a problem. You have a good one. Trans Woman Signature of Approval. Thank you, everybody. Michael Brooks, y'all. Be kind to people, ruthless with institutions.